but if you're, and thanks again. We're in the middle of our subscriber drive. So thanks to everyone who donated. It's been going well, and we set the goal of that the first $2,000 we raised would go towards freelance reporting, and we raised that $2,000. So we're going to be putting that money towards reporting, getting some new folks involved in writing for us, and we're excited about that. So thanks to our subscribers and donors who made that possible. Watch for that reporting in the coming months. We're also excited to support our managing editor, Natalie Bicknell-Argurius, who's is the second employee after myself, and she's been a big help in getting a lot of coverage out during this Northgate link extension opening that happened this past week, and very exciting time, and we tried to cover that as thoroughly as we could, and we got a lot of interest in those articles. So I think everyone was excited as we were that was happening. So thanks again for the support to make that possible. And if you're on the fence, we encourage you to chip in. We have the pop-up on for the rest of the week. Sorry about that, but the pop-up will be off soon. And it's just a good reminder to donate for folks who are thinking about it. And we also will, be trying to next time get some ways to get around that pop-up, but we our WordPress, it's hanging on by a thread, so we don't want to put too much on it, and it's expensive to get different stuff. But thanks for bearing with the pop-up. And we're just a few minutes away, starting with Nicole Thomas-Kennedy. She has the Urbanist Elections Committee endorsement. I threw the endorsements in the chat if you haven't got a chance to look at those. And that's another service we provide here, and it takes a ton of time. So we're grateful for volunteers who be a part of that committee. And it's another service you try to provide here and get some value. And so thanks for supporting that as well. All right, we're just close to the start here. So pretty soon I'll start with the bio for Nicole. You've got some more people coming in, but I really enjoyed the bio that Nicole had in her on her website, so I'm going to crib heavily for that. Nicole Thomas-Kennedy, we might call her NTK for short, and I'll just start cribbing my notes from that. And the first thing that she starts off with is she never saw herself becoming a lawyer. And as a teenager, she had a difficult life, dropped out of high school, bounced from city to city, sometimes unstably sheltered. She landed in Seattle at the age of 22, and that's where she kind of started putting down roots and finding stability. She got her GED and went to Seattle Central Community College, and it started establishing a strong support network. She was lucky enough to meet her partner of 15 years, enter recovery, and have a daughter. She entered law school with an infant, determined to create a better life and future for her child. And she became a public defender because she knew that without a stable place to live, a loving community, and an amazing partner, she would not be where she is today. And she wants to give back to the community that has given her so much. And she tried to center that knowledge in her law career. She's an experienced attorney. She is the attorney of record on over 200 civil cases and 400 criminal cases. And she boasts of never losing a trial. She hasn't lost a trial, which she attributes to the absurdity of the types of cases prosecution files, as much as her own legal prowess. She has firsthand knowledge and experience of how destabilizing effects of overly aggressive prosecutions reverberated through their lives, their families, and their communities of her clients. She saw poor people not just arrested, but prosecuted for stealing socks in the winter or food when they were hungry. Over and over again, the city attorney's office pursues prosecutions that are ineffective, damaging, and costly, both inflicting hardship on our most oppressed communities and wasting millions of dollars that could be spent on community-led evidence-based programming. She got involved defending pro bono on a pro bono basis protesters during the 2020 protests and volunteering time as an active member of the National Lawyers Guild. And she kind of at the last second got into this race and upset the incumbent, Pete Holmes, who's now out of the race, and she's facing a Republican, Ann Davison. So that is how we ended up here interviewing a surprise candidate, but a very exciting candidate, Nicole Thomas-Kennedy. And let me spotlight you. And questions will come in via the chat. So I'm going to mute folks because I'll be moderating the question. So please mute yourself and send your questions in via the chat. So sorry for cribbing nearly your whole bio from your website, Nicole, but you feel free to give us an intro.
Yeah, I mean, I hate talking about myself, so I really yeah, I'll just give a quick intro about my race. So thank you, Doug, for having me here. Thank you to the Urbanists. You guys have been some very early supporters, which I personally really loved. I love how wonky the Urbanist is. You guys really know what's going on. So I'm grateful for your endorsement in both the primary and the general. Your work to educate and inform voters about the policies that most immediately impact their daily lives is so critical. For those who haven't heard of me before, I'm Nicole Thomas-Kennedy. I'm running for city attorney because there are rich and powerful people in our society who believe that some of us deserve more safety than others. I'm running because I think we all deserve to be safe, regardless of zip code, race, gender, income, or any other factor. We all deserve to be safe in our homes and at our workplaces and on our streets in the city that we love. The city attorney's office has two main lines of work: criminal to prosecute misdemeanor crimes and civil to advise, defend, and litigate in the interests of the city government and city residents. Criminal side of Vision has got a lot of airtime, especially from the Tucker Carlson crowd. So I want to spend some time talking with you about the civil division and its role in ensuring that Seattle becomes the city we all want to live in, one where basic human rights and dignity are respected. The civil division is 2/3 of the city attorney's office, responsible for providing advice and guidance, policy, for defending policies once they're passed, for negotiating city contracts, and for proactively seeking justice for the city's residents. The Jumpstart tax is a good example of the work in this division. The effort was led by the city council with close cooperation from the current city attorney to craft the policy in the most defensible way possible, knowing that large corporations would sue, which they did. The lawsuit is currently with the Washington State Court of Appeals. The next court date is in late November. The likelihood that the next city attorney will inherit that legal process is high, and the next city attorney must be someone who will vigorously defend the tax, because the city attorney has the power and discretion to decide whether to fight hard or whether to settle. The majority of that revenue is targeted for affordable housing and Green New Deal improvements that our city desperately needs. Renter protections are another area of policies that are universally challenged and require a city attorney to ensure that renters in our city have their housing stability protected. Contracts for construction, land sales, and union contracts are also overseen by the city attorney's office. I worry about what it means that developers and mega landlords who are contributing heavily to my opponent. I worry about how much police accountability would be negotiated in contract by someone who attended Back the Blue rallies last summer instead of Black Lives Matter ones, and who does not seem to understand that the city attorney's role is one to collaborate on policy. And I was listening earlier today, and she doesn't understand that there's a role for the city attorney in police contract negotiations at all. And that's pretty worrying. As city attorney, my priority will be to ensure that the city and its residents are the first priority, and that negotiations for these contracts fully account for the impacts of everyone in our city. Pete Holmes and his team did a commendable job working toward pursuing Monsanto to pay for the cleanup of the Duwamish. rather than foisting that on Seattle taxpayers. Likewise, they have started the process to hold fossil fuel companies accountable for the costs we are all bearing from their irresponsible destruction of our environment, which they undertook knowing what kind of destruction they were going to cause. I'm eager to work with the team to continue that work. Unlike my opponent, who has never tried a case, I've never lost a trial. But we already talked about that. On the criminal side, I am committed to creating a city attorney's office that leads the nation in humane, data-driven, and progressive approaches to improving the safety of our city. There are some who argue that it's naive to believe that meeting people's basic human needs will improve safety. I believe it's far more naive and inhumane to believe that prosecuting poverty and moving so-called undesirables into jails and warehouses will improve safety. It won't. It hasn't. By definition, misdemeanor crimes have a maximum jail sentence of less than a year. Everyone convicted is going to get out and return to the community. Our collective best interest would show that we only prosecute, or would indicate that we should only prosecute and incarcerate when those will lead to changed behaviors. There are mountains of data showing that this is only true for a very small fraction of cases. My office will only prosecute where the data shows that this will make communities safer. When it doesn't, we will follow the data to work with other city, county, and state agencies to implement solutions that have been proven to work. We can solve these issues working together, but not by following the old failed practices. Every prosecution of theft of a sandwich or a pair of socks from Goodwill costs taxpayers over $10,000 on average. The alternatives is to shift that budget to concentrate on making sure survivors have what they need to heal and stay safe, and to make sure victims of property crime have a way to be compensated for their losses, and using prosecution as a last resort where the data shows that that's what will work. The remainder of the budget can be directed toward recovering the costs that large corporations impose on our city through pollution, waste, fraud, and tax evasion. Labor unions and Democratic groups, every Democratic group in the city, have endorsed my campaign because they know that everyday people of Seattle need a champion in the city attorney's office. The large corporations and wealthy homeowners who are supporting my opponent can afford their own attorneys, to champion their own interests. We are a people power campaign that's facing an unprecedented spending to defeat us. I think just today there was a new PAC that was formed that was like $250,000. Anyway, we need your help to make sure that Seattle voters can hear us through the noise of their mailers and ads. We have a fact-checking team that I would love for you all to sign up for. Hopefully someone will drop the link in the chat. And then you can also sign up for phone banking or canvassing on my website, ntkforjustice.com. If you have I'm told that my policy is very detailed, or my platform is very detailed. So I know that you all are wonky detailed people. So if you would like to read about my whole platform, it is on my website. And so thanks for the opportunity to talk to you all, and I look forward to questions and just having a discussion. Thanks.
Thanks so much for that intro. I wanted to start it off just talking about a word maybe that some people hadn't heard before 2 years ago, or maybe they think sounds strange or scary, or just they don't really familiar with it, but you define yourself as an abolitionist. So I wanted to hear what that means to you and how that's a better approach than our current approach.
Sure. So yes, I understand that it is a scary word for some. I think the fear factor comes from thinking that something's going to disappear overnight. And when I'm talking about police and prison abolition, it's a long process, but it also has it's been going on for decades. This work and activism has been going on for decades. And the movement itself is defined by building up community support and systems of accountability that can take the place of police and prisons. So it's building up systems where we don't need police and prisons for everything, not an overnight escape from New York type situation, which I don't want to live in. And so, yeah, I really do want a better future for all of Seattle, but I've seen firsthand that the way that we punish people and the money that we spend on doing it is not solving the problem. In fact, it's making it a lot worse. And so there's, you can look at a lot of other countries in the world. We are the only country that incarcerates people at the rate that we do, and we are not even close to the safest. We're actually in the bottom half. So, the radical part is this mass incarceration and continuing to feed mass incarceration, thinking that we are going to get public safety out of it. We haven't, and we're not going to. So we really need to start looking at the reality of what our problems are and start attacking the root problems instead of just temporarily disappearing people.
And I think what really impressed the Urbanist Elections Committee was the amount of data and that went into that approach. One thing I saw a study just kind of shared around today that when they look at sort of a meta study of prisons and their effect, they couldn't find that incarcerating people was leading to better outcomes. It was just leading to worse outcomes, recidivism and all of that, as you kind of alluded to and mentioned. You know, do you consider this sort of an evidence-based approach? And like, how do you kind of make the case to people who are just, they kind of go back to the sort of knee-jerk, like, it seems like more cops, more prisons equals less crime?
Yeah. And I mean, I get why people think that. That's kind of what we all grew up thinking. Especially, I mean, the current prison population, the explosion of prisons, like, really has been like a 40-year thing. And the idea of being tough on crime, and if someone's not behaving the way we want, just like, we'll punish them harder, and that will solve the problem. I get why on a very like on a sort of obvious level, that seems like it would make sense. But what I do rely on the data, but also on common sense, you know, so the roots of violent crime are poverty, isolation, and trauma. And those are three things that are all, that's kind of like the whole, that's what prison and jail is. So it's really not surprising that that what we're replicating over and over again is situations that put people in more desperate circumstances. And there is a lot of data to back that up. You know, there is, I think you were talking about the University of Chicago study that just came out. Maybe, is that the one you're talking about? Okay. There's that. There is cities like Boston, Baltimore, Philadelphia, San Francisco. You know, they've aged in a more progressive way of approaching criminal justice, and they've seen declines in crime overall. And it's kind of funny to me because people constantly send me stuff about Chesa Boudin in San Francisco saying like, look what happened in San Francisco, it's so horrible, like everything's a mess. And then you actually look at like the data dashboards, and by almost every measure, crime is down, calls to police are down, you know, like especially property crime is down. But there is such this idea that if he's not punishing everybody, then it must be really bad. And I'm like, well, you're sending me an article that says like everybody hates him, but crime is down. So I'll take it. You know, like if that's what happens to me, and I anticipate it will be, you know, people are going to hate me no matter what, but I'm really interested in making the city safer and more livable for everyone. And so if that means stepping outside of the culturally appropriate means of dealing with things to actually deal with things in an approach that is based in evidence, based in data, and also based in common sense, then I'm fine with taking that on.
The other thing that you've been taking some dings and some attacks from your opponent and her allies for are all your angry, mean tweets from the last summer during the protests, and I was just curious if you'd care to address that at all, and you know, sort of add the context there that sort of seemed to be missing in some of the discussion of that.
Sure. So there was a lot of things that was going on in 2020. But I think the thing that really, for me, stands out the most is my neighborhood was gassed over 10 times. And for people being in the street demanding an end to racist police violence, you know, that and the response was brutality and this tear gassing. But I had to buy my 9-year-old daughter a gas mask to use inside my own home. And so, yeah, I was angry. I was very angry, and I was angry for a long time. And I hope any parent would be, you know, nobody should have to go through that. And so, you know, that combined with my public defense experience of the things that I was seeing daily in and out, I think really led me to a place where I was pretty outraged. And so, yeah. And I mean, also it's Twitter. I mean, like, and I'm speaking back to police, you know, I'm not punching down. I'm like speaking back to police who are brutalizing my neighborhood, my friends, and killing people. And so, yeah, I mean, that's all I have to say about that.
Enough said. I want to start pivoting over to some audience questions. So we've got a good number. And this is a good follow-up. We kind of addressed it in my first question, but we got a question from John asking, describe what civic and civil life would look like in Seattle if the city adopted abolition policies, and why residents shouldn't feel apprehensive about the possibility of a severely reduced city police force.
Well, so as a city attorney, I don't have the ability to reduce the police force. That's the city council issue. What I can do is reduce misdemeanor prosecutions. And so I think that a lot of times people think that not prosecuting everything means doing nothing, and that is not what is going to happen at all. So I really want to do things that that actually address and solve our problems. And so it would be, instead of prosecuting people, putting them in jail for misdemeanors, when it comes to property crimes, having a victims compensation fund for people and small businesses that are hurt by these misdemeanor crimes that currently have no recourse. If you have, if someone takes your bike, if someone breaks your window, even if the case gets all the way through court and someone is found guilty or pleads guilty, if it's a person that is unsheltered or that doesn't have a job that can't pay you back, you don't get anything. And so I'm going to have a victims compensation fund that doesn't require prosecution, and that people can get their money back, and it can be done a lot quicker. I think the estimates for last year for how much for people in small businesses for unpaid restitution for the entire city of Seattle was less than $90,000. So considering each prosecution costs us about $10,000, I think we can save a little bit of money, and I think we can actually give back to businesses. Also, I want to be survivor centered. When it comes to cases of interpersonal violence, I have always said that I'm not taking prosecution off the table, but what is true is that everyone that goes to jail is going to get out. So we need to make sure that people, especially those affected by intimate partner violence, can stay safe. And survivors of that kind of violence have been asking for the same things for years. Whether it's housing, transportation, childcare, they depend on partners for a lot of things, and they are left in very precarious situations where they cannot stay safe when people are removed. And so I would like to focus on their safety, not punishment, although that might be part of it, but that cannot be the focus. We need to really focus on the problem. And really, I think that, the issue that we're seeing in Seattle now, we have lots of untreated mental health issues. We have addiction issues. We have a lot of people that can't afford anywhere to live. And those are the problems that need to be addressed. So the more that we can address those problems, the less, and the more we can meet people's basic human needs, the less crime that we're going to have, and the quicker we can have a city where there aren't people that have to live in parks anymore.
And related to that, sort of what you want to focus the office on, Melissa had a question. What are some of the most important kinds of cases you hope to litigate on behalf of the civil division?
That's a great question. So I kind of alluded to it in my intro a lot, but the Jumpstart tax is supposed to fund the Green New Deal and affordable housing, two things we sorely need money for. And it's, since the Jumpstart tax's inception, it's been under attack. I don't imagine that is going to end anytime soon. I do not intend to settle that litigation. I will aggressively defend the Jumpstart tax. Defense is my jam. That's what I do. I love defending, and I would love to defend on behalf of the city. Also, there's, if you look at my opponent's donors, it's all the big landlords and real estate developers that are not very happy about our first in time and our fair housing laws that have been passed. The thing about those things too is if there's no one to enforce them, then they don't really mean anything. And that's something like I did eviction and housing defense for all of last year. And that was something that I noticed over and over again, was sometimes all it took was a call from an attorney saying like, hey, I'm so like, I'm this attorney on behalf of, whoever. And they're like, fine, I'll give them the deposit back. There's just a lot of things that just access to legal counsel can do. And also defending those laws and keeping them in place is going to be one of the things that's critical in moving us out of the current crisis that we have. Also, the fossil fuel litigation. You all saw that the ocean caught on fire last year. The climate crisis is here. There's no more speculation about it. Currently, taxpayers are the ones that have to pay for cooling shelters, for fresh air shelters. It's not going to get better anytime soon, unfortunately. We are going to need resources to survive this. And those resources should come from the fossil fuels that cause this damage, not taxpayers who are forced to suffer from them.
We got a few questions about the city's existing pre-filing diversion programs. So kind of looping back to that subject, specifically, Aaron mentioned the city's specialty courts like the mental health court, the infraction program, driving while license suspended, et cetera, that offer alternatives to incarceration or other kinds of punishment through education and services. How are the existing leniency programs insufficient, and what do you plan to do differently?
So I think it depends on what we're talking about. There's lots of different kinds of diversion programs. Some of them are more successful than others. Also, some of them work with more affected populations than others. So, when I was a public defender, I saw LEAD and REACH being very successful, and not so much in the more recent years. But the huge difference is housing. I used to have REACH and LEAD clients who could get into housing. That's what that's one of the main things they got with LEAD was housing. And now there is no housing. And so that's where those programs are failing, I think, or not serving us as well as they should be. It's because that we are lacking in critical infrastructure for some of those things. Other programs like Choose 180 is wildly successful. Their recidivism rates are, it's really, really, really low. And they cost so much less than traditional prosecution. I think a traditional Choose 180 diversion costs around $2,500. So that's about a quarter of what we're spending with much better outcomes. So that's a success. Some of the alternative courts, I think Veterans Court works well because it is community-based. So that's one thing it has going for it. Mental health court is not really that successful, unfortunately. In mental health court, people are asked to voluntarily engage with services, or they could be found guilty or prosecuted for a crime. It's not the people that make it through mental health court, that jump through all the hoops, that do all the things that they're supposed to do. I'm not sure that that's the population that we really need to be accommodating that much. Those are people that could probably get there anyway. The thing that I always saw with mental health court was, are you confused and is your life disorganized and you are having trouble managing things? Well, here's 14 more appointments. And if you miss any of them, you're going to jail. I just don't think it's that helpful. The success rates aren't that good. And I think that we could be doing a lot more with outreach. I also think why are we asking lawyers and judges to oversee mental health issues? These are addiction and mental health, they're public health crises, and we're throwing away money on lawyers who don't and judges who aren't qualified to handle those problems. And so we need to redirect those resources into the people that can actually be of assistance.
And we had another question that was related to the topic of diversion programs and restorative justice, and that related to, what about the more sort of problem cases or serious misdemeanor cases where there has been physical harm or something more serious? Is there still a good fit for that, a way that we'll deal with that in a restorative justice model, and kind of fill us in on that?
Sure. A lot of range of things in this area of interpersonal violence. There's just a lot of different things happening. So I think that what I've said about some of those more serious misdemeanor cases is that prosecution is going to be an option. If there are some cases that can't be dealt with in any other way, then that will remain an option for now. It can't be taken off the table because we don't have adequate community programs that can handle that right now. And that is a process of building up while taking away. I think that some programs of restorative and transformative justice can be very helpful for some of those cases, but in very specific ways. It has to be appropriate, if we're talking about interpersonal violence, that people can't still be living together. It has to be consensual, meaning like both parties want to do this thing, and it involves community. There's just a lot of things that are there. So it is definitely restorative or transformative justice could be possible, is an option. Not appropriate for everything, but it is an option. Traditional prosecution is an option. Diversion programs are an option. There's a lot of people who actually want help with problems, especially when especially interpersonal violence problems, where, there's a lot of people who grew up in a certain way, in a certain kind of environment, that don't know how to, they don't want to be like that. They don't want to act like that. That's not who they feel like they are, but there's no programs for people who want to get out of those situations. And the best that we can offer people is individual therapy, which is really expensive and not everybody can afford it. So we need to be building up programs that, tackle these harder problems, because the idea that someone is just a throwaway person because they've done something in the past and they have no ability to change, I don't think that's making us any safer as a society.
We have a question from Mike, asking if the city's attorney's office can help eradicate covenants that prevent affordable housing in the wealthiest parts of the city. And I would kind of broaden that out to generally defending the city's reforms on equitable land use, and if that's something you would prioritize when in office.
Anything that really helps with affordable housing, that is the biggest thing that's facing Seattle right now. So while the city attorney cannot change land use codes, I would love to work in tandem with the city council and the mayor on repealing some of those exclusionary codes. Absolutely. And I would absolutely defend them. We need, it's just the antiquated zoning laws we have are clearly hurting all of us. So that really does need to be a priority.
It seems like there's sort of a delicate dance too. I'm not sure if it's mostly with the city's other legal counsel or if has been with Pete Holmes and the city attorney's office, but sometimes we'll hear a progressive proposal for whether it's a tax revenue or whether it's renters rights package or whatever, and what the city may push back and that, this is likely to end up in court, and some of the more conservative members, either the mayor or the city council members, will suggest just not doing it because it's going to be consuming of resources. What's your thought on that? Do you think the city attorney should be, sort of interacting with the city council's work in that way, or is that a real concern that you're just going to run out of resources, or how do you kind of address that?
Yeah, so in every legal problem, there's there's always a way you can win. That's what I think. But everything needs to be assessed from a lot of different angles. And so I think the challenge for the city attorney is to help the city council pass legislation that can stand up to legal challenges. And there are definitely, there's advising that can be done that will, it's really the responsibility of the city attorney to advise the council fully on what's going to potentially happen. And so that doesn't mean that every piece of potentially risky legislation should be checked out the window, but it does mean that I would have to be honest about this is what might happen, and then it will be up to the council and the mayor to do what they want with that. But I know a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about, both candidates for mayor and most of the people on the city council, these are things that they really want to push forward and do. And it's going to take some collaboration, some willing collaboration, I think, with the city attorney's office to get a lot of these things done. And I think it's pretty critical to share progressive values on what we prioritize and the kind of things that we're focusing on and pushing through.
And I also know that one big issue that the city attorney's office has been intertwined with, and that Pete Holmes has had a big role in, is the consent decree. And what do you kind of think of where that is at? Can it be salvaged and serve the city's goals? I mean, you're kind of again in a role of sort of being, you're limited in how many steps you can take, but what would be the right approach to that?
I mean, I think that, the consent decree, there's a lot of different angles on how to do things, or, I mean, whether it can actually accomplish our goals is, we need to, this is how I feel. We need to have more goals than what's laid out in the consent decree. And so, the judge, I know Judge Robart has expressed some hesitation with defunding, but he also can't say it's predicated on whether the SVD falls out of compliance with the consent decree, which won't necessarily happen. So I think that there's a way to work around and maybe with the consent decree, but I also think that it doesn't go far enough. And it hasn't been like a good safeguard, honestly, for accountability. I mean, the things that were bargained out of the contract 4 years ago, I think there was like 33 things that the Community Police Commission was like, we said no on this, and then they just let it happen anyway. And we could all see in 2020 what the result of that was. So I think it's going to be a delicate legal dance, I think, inside the consent decree, or what we're going to do with the consent decree going forward. I really do think, though, that even if it is the floor for police accountability, we need to be going much further. And it is the next city attorney that will be at the bargaining table for the next police union contract. And I think it's fairly well known that I am not exactly deferential to police. And I think that's what we need moving forward. We've tried the deferential approach for many, many years, and we've reached, I think was Merrick Bob said, SVD has reached their nadir. And so, that's where it led us. So we need to be a little bit more serious and dedicated to making sure that there are accountability measures in place.
And it would be great I could see such a contrast between you and Davison on that particular issue, especially. And certainly that it's been such a saga already, and I think it's going on 10 years, maybe 9 years, in the consent decree, and police reform just seems to be kind of going in circles. And I guess while we're on the subject of negotiating that contract, it seems like the guild has been increasingly just kind of at war with the city council and with some of the priorities coming out of there, which I do think kind of represent oftentimes the will of the people to a very large degree, which such as like the vaccine mandate we've seen recently, and they're not wanting to implement it. Do you see those negotiations, like what what do you think is the best outcome? What's realistic, and how can the city attorney help?
I mean, the best outcome, that's really hard to say. I mean, I really do think that we need to be building in reforms that have material results, things like getting rid of forced arbitration after firing or something like that, giving the city the people more control over what's happening and what they can accept and what they are able to accept from police. But I also think that we need to be not expanding the budget at all, and that's, I think the police reform approach has always been more training, more technology, more body cameras. And I remember during the Ferguson protests, like people were asking for body cameras, they were pushing it. And, all it really gave us was a bird's eye view of the violence that happened. It didn't stop anything. It just made sure that we could all see it sometimes. And I think that's really the failure of taking a reformist approach, is thinking that this system that's rooted in slavery and being anti-poor, being anti-disability, that those things can be somehow rooted out of the system. I mean, they're foundational parts of it. So that's why finding ways to chip away at what we're asking them to do is going to get us to a place of better public safety. It's really a weird situation right now with the SPOG in terms of how aggressive they are. Those like weird, like feeling safe yet, like videos and memes are so bonkers to me. That's like, that's how you're approaching the populace, is this sort of like hostage situation of like, if you don't give me what I want, then you're not going to be safe. And I think that, one of the reasons that I was successful in the primary is because of what people saw from the police union in 2020. It's just, there's this constant sort of aggressive narrative about like, show deference to us or we are going to do whatever the hell we want. And we're not going to solve that problem with more deference, So I don't know what the ideal outcome is going to be, but I do think that capitulation is not going to get us anywhere.
And I think we've seen that that even though it is kind of like you said, absurd and just kind of clownish almost, the way that SPOG has been sort of messaging on some of these issues, it does seem like they have an apparatus that puts their message out, some would call propaganda, out, into the world. And whether that's specific incidents, like how did a police involved shooting go, how did that go down? The police report will be reported in the media as news. And we've also seen, SPOG's talking about response times. It just so happens that the conservative candidates are talking about response times, and there's not like a lot of context in there oftentimes. So, like what is a 1 minute faster response time gonna tangibly improve people's lives? When most crimes have already, the damage has already been done within the first few minutes, and then the suspect often is on the lam at that point. So I guess it's sort of a strategy question of how do you combat that apparatus, and how do you kind of educate folks that, like, the sort of what you hear on the 5 o'clock news, the knee jerk, like, if we get response times to 7 minutes, somehow that's magically gonna make all crime go away or something. Like, how do you push back against that and sort of sell the alternative in a better way?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's really selling itself in many ways right now. That we've sort of reached this level of like absurd funding combined with like getting less for our money. I think solving some of the more serious crimes, like the rates of clearance, like that they solve, is down considerably from the early 2000s. So I think on one hand you can use the data to show, but I think that really people seeing for themselves what's happening has been the thing that's really helped a lot. I think that people seeing that SPD lied continuously during the protests, saying like a candle is a bomb, and a protester broke through the line and blew a hole, like, you know what I mean? Like, there's just so many ridiculous, absurd things that happened last year that we've always been taught, like, I'm not all, but a lot of us have been taught to trust police officers and think, why would they lie? This last year really kind of blew a hole in that idea. So I think that on one hand, police are doing a good job of pushing that narrative themselves. But I also think that, like, continuously showing the data that actually we're getting less for our money, and also showing the data from so many other countries that are doing it so much better, and asking people, what do they really want? I mean, sometimes it genuinely is like for the problem to be moved 3 blocks over. I talked to some people a couple of days ago that's what they wanted. And like, I appreciate their honesty, but that's not a possibility, you know? But I think that there's a lot of people that are starting to wake up to the idea that like these sort of root issues that keep coming up are not going to be solved. And it's something that's, as long as I think people keep talking about it, then that's what's going to start breaking through. I mean, we've all lived through the war on drugs. There's more people addicted to drugs than there ever have been before. You know, there's so much evidence of abject failure. And I really think that the younger generation, so something I've seen canvassing a lot is, you know, younger people educating their parents on stuff. And I so love how many, like, young people are just they're not as steeped in the BS that maybe I grew up and my parents grew up in, and are really asking those hard questions, like, why is it like this? And as you know, income inequality increases and poverty increases, there's no good answers for that in this system. You know what I mean? If your answer is more police, like, it seems pretty obvious that it's not going to solve the problem, not to everybody, but I think really just continuing to talk. There's so much groundwork laid, you know, between Black Lives Matter, Block the Bunker, No New Youth Jail, you know, and on back. Like, people have been doing this work for years. And I think just like staying loud and staying on top of it and not being complacent and not always doing what you're told. I think those are really, really important things.
All right, reminder folks to, if you have any last burning questions, start putting them in the chat, because we have about 10 minutes left. We did get a couple of questions that I wanted to pivot to that and you know, kind of preface that with you know, people, you know, friends and neighbors you talk to who have had, you know, a crime happen to them, whether it's their car broken into or you know, getting you know, accosted in the street or whatever. You know, that is a you know, crappy experience that people, no one wants people to go through that. And at the same time, you know, how to make a you know, a solution to that is complicated. But we did get a question, you know, how do we keep our transit stations and other kind of public places like that safe, given that I think that what you kind of see portrayed in the media, and it's somewhat, you know, there's definitely truth to it, that right now there's you know, just a lot more both visible homelessness and also just you know, potentially crime is on some kinds of crime are on an increase right now. So how do you kind of deal with that with the approach of not criminalizing poverty?
So the approach is not prosecuting for poverty, but also addressing the underlying problems. So whether we're talking about homelessness, mental health, addiction problems, you know, those things are things that we need to address. And those are the things that I would like to address instead of just putting someone in jail for a temporary amount of time, because when we're talking about misdemeanors, we are really talking about a temporary amount of time. So it's addressing the root problems that are going to make things safer. Because, you know, my opponent has said that like the crisis that we're seeing on the streets right now is the result of under prosecution. And that's just so absurd. I mean, even if we wanted to round up every single homeless person and put them in jail, which I don't, but even if we wanted to, we don't have enough jail beds. We have like 5 times as many people living unsheltered than we have beds in the jail. And so we need to stop considering that as an option. I mean, the thing is, it's not working right. And I know everyone has this impression that, or not everyone, but a lot of people have the impression that it's because like things aren't being prosecuted enough. And, you know, I know like not everybody worked in Seattle Municipal Court, but I personally was shocked when I worked there, because I thought, oh, this is liberal Seattle. It's like, you know, it won't be this bad. And then like, you know, I have cases where it's like someone stole deodorant and a toothbrush, like, and that's what we're spending money on. So, and that is the reality of what a lot of misdemeanors are crimes of poverty. So, and we're not going to address that. We've never been able to address that through prosecution. So really tackling those root problems, but also being very aware of the fact that survivors do need things. You know, it's not that people should suck it up. It's really that everybody deserves to be safe. everybody deserves to be heard. Everybody needs to get to feel safe, and that isn't going to come from locking up everybody that makes us uncomfortable. But there does need to be a recognition that survivors do need repair, and so whatever that is, if it's economic repair, we've already talked about that, but is it mental health services, something to help them with there's lots of different things that survivors need, and what survivors have said over and over again, and what the data again says is that most survivors by a large margin, I think it's like 15-1, don't want more punishment. They want to feel safe, and they want to know that it's not happening again. And so we need to take steps in that direction. And there's lots of ways to do that, but jailing people isn't one of them.
Yeah, and I suppose Ann Davison maybe should have run for county prosecutor if she was interested in felonies. And that would be against Dan Sederberg, who also has a little bit of flip-flop history himself of whether he's a Democrat or Republican. So that would be an interesting race. But he's on the Democratic side now, so at least he flipped further in the right direction. Yeah. But anyways, a little aside. But we did get a question about bail reform, and mentioning that Ann Davison, Brandon mentioned that Ann Davison has brought that up, and Brandon hasn't seen as much from you on that. So what are your goals in this area?
Yeah, I don't want to use cash bail. I don't think it's particularly helpful, especially when we're talking about misdemeanor cases. I don't want to see people sitting in jail over misdemeanors. I mean, if there is like a public safety issue, a real public safety issue, then that's something that can be addressed. But for the most part, a lot of people are sitting in jail on misdemeanors because they can't afford, the $2,000 bail, you have to pay $200 to get out. A lot of people can't pay that. And so, cash bail is it punishes the poor. If you're not poor, you can get out, but if you're poor, you have to stay in. There's nothing in service of public safety about making poor people sit in jail over wealthy people. So I don't really intend to use cash bail like I said, it's not that necessary for misdemeanors. Also, that's how so many things get pushed through Seattle Municipal Court, is by the imposition of bail, because the choices are either you can pay to get out. And if you if you want to keep your job, like say you're living paycheck to paycheck, if you can afford to bail out, you might be able to keep your job, but you've probably already been there for a couple of days, so maybe not. But if you can't afford to bail out, I have clients that they lose jobs, they lose housing. I had multiple clients that lived in their cars, and they couldn't afford to bail out. Their cars got towed. And they lost every worldly possession, and so the choices are, do I want to sit here for 2 to 3 months waiting for a trial, and lose everything? Or do I want to, if I can't afford to bail out, do I want to just take a plea and get out of here as soon as humanly possible? And that's what most people do. And that's how they get a lot of those pleas. And it's, I don't know how a plea can be voluntary when it's coerced that way. So yeah, that's kind of my approach to bail.
Yeah, and that's just a classic example of how rich people have their own justice system, where they already have restorative justice because they can buy their way out of problems. And it'd be nice if we all could live such lives of luxury. But we also had a question, and this is almost a more incredulous, just a compliment. But Aaron asked, how is it even possible to win every trial you've been in? And you alluded to this in your intro, but I would be interested as well in the longer story of that.
Yes, I would love it if I could say because I'm that amazing. But really, a lot of the trials that I've done are just so petty and ridiculous and absurd that, the prosecutor has discretion over which cases they file. And so that discretion is supposed to be used to seek justice, not convictions. So that's one thing. And then on the other hand, they're not supposed to be bringing cases to court that they can't prove. And there's a lot of cases that I've had in court that I'm just like, you don't have it. Like you don't have another witness. You don't have there's so much that that they waste time filing and pursuing cases that they can't prove. And so there's been a couple of wins that I'm just like, that was definitely me. But there's also a lot of trials that I've done that's just like, this is such an incredibly huge waste of resources. Just unbelievable. I've even had like jury verdicts. First, I've never had to wait more than an hour for a jury verdict, which is also like, you're prosecuting the wrong cases when the jury is just like, we got to get out of here, not guilty. But I've also had, you can talk to the jury afterwards. And I've had cases where we walk into the jury room and the first thing they say is, why? Why did you do this? Whose decision was it to pursue this case? Like, why did we have to sit here for 3 days over this? I mean, there really is a lot of cases going forward that should not belong there at all.
And in
But
our,
thanks.
yeah,
Thanks for doubting.
thanks, Erin, and thanks for the answer. And just to kind of, we mentioned this in our primary endorsement write-up, but one of the things that sealed the deal for the committee, I think, was you brought up examples of cases where Pete Holmes, who had often talked about diversion when he was on the campaign trail, like you said, he was still prosecuting people for stealing food or stealing clothes from Goodwill. I just to underscore that for folks, because I think it's important to really do your research on candidates, that people can say something on a campaign trail and speak to a diversion program that's a pretty tiny part of what their work they actually do, because there's so many other cases. But I don't know if you have any insight on if potentially that was just him not realizing, because it's a large office, what was going on, or if it is hard for the city attorney to sort of make sure everyone's doing what the directive is at the top, or how to kind of ensure everyone can get on the same page, and whether or not you think you can do that, and you can kind of and for you, that's not just going to be a diversion program in the corner, but a whole approach up and down the office.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know what happened with Pete. I mean, I will say that I noticed a couple of forums I did with him where he said, we don't prosecute poverty, we don't prosecute disability. And I was like, I was taken aback by that. And then eventually he stopped saying it. So to me, I was just like, oh, did someone tell him? It's a really big office. There's a lot of stuff going on. I think that's why it's really important. So I will say that in the civil division, I think Pete has done a great job, and there's a lot of good institutional knowledge there that I would like to keep around. In the criminal division, I think the issue is setting policy, but also finding people who are going to implement your vision. Because what I've seen time and again as a public defender, whether it's in municipal court or superior court or whatever, there's always this default back to punishment. There's currently a community court right now, and it's doing pretty good, but we had a community court before, like three years ago, and we had needs-based sentencing. We've had all these like different sort of reform things, and they always turn back into jail. And so having really clear vision for how things are going to operate, and having the people that work for you have that vision, because I think that's kind of where things went a little wonky maybe with that office, is like there are some prosecutors over there that want to be actually helping and reducing the problem, and then there's some other ones that are just like, you broke the law, go to jail, no sort of like further, more complex analysis. And so I think it's going to be about having people in there that share the vision and being able to implement that. And I know that I think Pete was a little bit more involved with the civil side of things. So I think maybe that's what happened there. I'm not really sure. I mean, I'll be honest, I'm not really sure. But yeah, I have a lot of people that I want to bring in the criminal division. And I've also talked to the union over there as well, because they were worried, because I said something to the effect of like, I'm just going to fire everybody. But they were like, and I said, well, I didn't think any of you would want to work here. under like what I'm talking about. And they were like, actually, there are people that really want to do that. And I've heard that from some of my public defender friends too, that they're just like, there's like a couple people over there that are just like, man, we would love to work that way. We love it. And they have been like trying to push for that for a while, but there's just been pressure from higher up to do things differently. So I think, it really has to be like a shared vision and a commitment, because it is so easy to just fall back to that, lock them up thing, I mean, and not easy for me. I think that there's, I think it's such a simple, immediate solution, that we've fallen into the trap of using for everything. So yeah, it has to be very values based, I think.
Yeah, and it does feel like we're in a little bit of a sea change moment. And that's really a testament to the Black Lives Matter movement and other movements that are just like, really, whether it's just criminal justice reform in general, just like really, I think winning people over and educating people. But the traditional thing in politics was you are a prosecutor and you get promoted and then you become a politician. There aren't a lot of public defenders who are in city attorneys' offices or in public roles like that. And I think that's starting to change a little bit. And that's a good thing. I don't know if people realize how thankless of a job that being a public defender is, or even working in private practice and evictions and stuff like that. But it's not well paid. It's you have a ton of clients, and I think that's where some of the cavalier attitudes towards of prosecutors come to, because they just hope that either the defendant can't get help or gets a public defender or legal aid attorney that is so stretched thin and exhausted that they can't give the best legal defense, adequate legal defense sometimes, or the judge just has a habit of just siding with prosecutors. And we saw a lot of retired judges endorse your opponent. Side note, but how do you think that public defending experience would change how you do this? And are there laws you would, or reforms you would encourage? Like I know the city has a right to counsel now in eviction court. Is that something you think should be broader? I know it's not something you directly will do in the office, but obviously your advice would carry weight once you're in office in particular.
Yeah, that's a good question. So to say, for some of those retired judges, I've appeared in front of those judges, and one of them, there's two, I think, that are on that list that I've appeared in front of, and I have many things to say about one, but I'll just talk about the other just very quickly. He had a hat he had a red hat, baseball cap in his chambers that said, "Make Seattle Municipal Court great again." So he doesn't side with me, and that's okay. But I think the difference between being a public defender and a prosecutor, I mean, one of the most stark differences is that prosecutors don't have any contact with defendants. So, as a public defender, I got to meet my clients, talk to them, figure out what was going on with them, but not just that, like their families. I saw how things reverberated out through their communities. And I think that makes a huge difference, because even like, I'll give you an example. When I was a public defender, I would get a new case and I would read the police report and I was like, oh no, you get this idea in your head of what happened and what the person might look like, or, some other thing. And then I would go and meet the client, and then they would tell me what actually happened. And it made so much sense, like how it got interpreted on the paper, and kind of the idea of what was being sold to justify an arrest. And it was surprising to me every time, even after I did it for years, that I was just like, man, like I'm always going to be wrong on this. And I really love that. But I think that's the really critical piece. There's a lot of different pieces, but I think that's a really critical piece. And that is one of the reasons why I think as a public defender, I can uniquely see that the system is not working. Like a lot of prosecutors don't know what happens to people after they get convicted. I did post-conviction work as well. And it's not over, it's not over at that point, not just for you know, people go to jail and they're in there for a long time, but also like what happens afterwards, what happens when they come out, you know, that's just something that prosecutors don't see. They only see this like piece of paper that says like you did something bad, and so I guess you did. And I think that that's the unique perspective, and there is a sea change, you know. We'll see what happens with that. Yes, we're not widely respected public defenders, I've noticed, although we're getting some clout now. But it was yeah, it was very much like a, even when I said, like, when I was in law school, that's what I wanted to do. Like, even members of my family were like, ew, like, why would you do that? Like, can't you get a real job? You know, like that kind of thing. And I think, yeah, there has been a sea change. Also, Deborah Juarez is a former public defender. Hey, but there is Joe Biden was a public defender. But yeah, there's definitely been a like prosecutor to politician pipeline that's been going on for a long time. And I'm hoping that that's getting a little bit disrupted at this point.
Great. Well, we are just at time. Thanks so much for giving us an hour of your time. It's very generous of you in this busy campaign season. I did want to give a recommendation for folks who, I believe you still can accept democracy vouchers, right? Or are you capped?
Yes, well, I think, no, well, we got to the cap and the cap just got raised today.
Oh, great. So make sure you invest your democracy vouchers. Don't let those go to waste. Definitely put them towards a good candidate like the NTK. Here is the website again. And if you've already committed your democracy vouchers, you know, money always works too. And as you alluded to earlier, the PAC spending starting to come in pretty heavy, and it looks like Ann Davison is going to have a huge independent expenditure. So it definitely helps to equal that out. Yeah. And is there any other way that people can get involved, or any last words you wanted to share?
Just that, I mean, if you go to my website, there's people can, you know, so you can canvas. I actually have grown to love canvassing, which was strange. The first time I did it with my deputy campaign manager, and I was like, wow, this is really nervous making. He's like, everybody wants to build community, and then nobody wants to knock on the door. I was like, oh, that's true. And so I got used to it, but I actually like it now. But I understand that everybody wants to leave their house. So there's also phone banking and text banking. And there is also something that I'm starting, or that my campaign is starting, about fact checking, that I think someone put a link in the chat for it. Oh yeah, so you can sign up to be a fact checker, and to push back, because there's a lot of sort of right-wing misinformation that's happening right now. So if you want to get up to date on what's happening with the campaign every day, like the kind of stuff that we're going to be talking about every day, you can sign up to be a fact checker. I'll drop it again. So yeah, there's lots of ways to get involved. There we go. Yeah, so if you can sign up there, if you want to do that as well. But thank you, everyone, and thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks again. Yeah, we really appreciate it. And thanks everyone for joining us. Have a good rest of your night.
Bye, everybody.